Let's talk about styling modules. So far, I mostly talked about stuff that you shouldn't do in tkinter in terms of styling. This is going to change now, because external modules are really good to add style and to use it easily. These external modules build on top of tkinter and improve certain parts of it. Most of them are styling, but they also add a few more extra functionalities. Custom tkinter and ttk bootstrap are the really common options. I'm going to start with custom tkinter because this is what I think is the best option for tkinter in terms of styling. It's also the one I really like to use. Custom tkinter works by using the same widgets as ttk, but it lets you customize all of them easily. On top of that, there are also some additional widgets, and every single widget has a dark and a light mode. That way, you can basically create any kind of style that you want. Before I jump into the code, there's one more thing I do want to cover, and that is that custom tkinter has a really good documentation. The site with all of the code is looking something like this, although if you scroll down, you can already see some demos for the dark and the light mode. All of these elements are dynamically generated, meaning you can customize a lot of different things here. On top of that, if you go down a tiny bit further, you have the documentation. In here, on the right side, you have all of the different widgets and all of the elements of custom tkinter. If I, for example, click on ctk label, there we have an example of the code, we have all of the arguments, and then we get a bit more information. This is literally all we need. And here you can see, for example, we can set the text, the width, the height, the corner radius, a foreground color, a text color, and a font. And all of this is very easily implemented. I suppose the best example here would be CTK button on the right. This is just a simple button. As you can see here, you can customize every single element of this button quite easily. If you contrast this with standard tkinter, where you have to create a style object and in there you have to create a map, none of this is necessary here. You could simply set a foreground color, a hover color, a border color, a text disabled color, basically whatever you want. There are lots of different options in here. So let's actually create a basic custom tkinter app. Although for that, first of all, we have to install custom tkinter because it doesn't come with Python by default. For that, once again, we either need the PowerShell or the terminal, depending if you are on Windows or on macOS. In my case, I'm using the PowerShell, so I need pip install custom tkinter. Although in my case, I already have this one installed, so it's not doing anything. If you were using macOS, this would be pip free install custom tkinter. Here we have a completely empty Python file. The reason why I have nothing ready is because we are not going to use any of the tkinter widgets we have used so far. Instead, I want to import custom tkinter. This is going to be kind of annoying to write. I usually abbreviate this as CTK. The best comparison here is that all of this is fairly similar to TTK in the sense that inside of this CTK module, we have a ton of widgets that we can use. For example, we can use this to create a window. This is going to be another window that I want to store in a variable. And then here we need CTK and then CT, all in upper score, and then K in lower score. Don't forget to call this. Once we have that, we can run the entire thing with window.main loop. If I execute the entire thing, we already get a window that is looking significantly better. A really important thing that you do have to understand is that this CTK window inherits from the tkinter window. As a consequence, we have all of the default arguments we could use for the window. For example, we could set a window.title. Let me call it a custom tkinter app. That is some terrible spelling. That looks better. If I run this thing now and increase the size, we have a custom tkinter app. Although I just realized there's another typo in there. That is looking better. Besides that, we can also set window.geometry. In here, as always, we need a string with a number. Let's go with 600 by 400. Running this now, we get a much larger window. With that, we have a window. Next up, we can create some widgets. For example, if we want to create a label, I want to store this in a variable. All we need here is CTK and then CT TTK with label. Just like with TTK, we need the master, which in my case is going to be the window. After we have that, I can set some text. This can be a CTK label. This is going to return a widget, and this widget I have to place on the window with some kind of layout method. Let's go with pack. If I run this now, we have a CTK label. So far, we have some very basic functionality. This CTK label gives us a ton of options for customization. Just for reference, here is the documentation. What we could set, for example, is the corner radius, the foreground color, and the text color. I guess the foreground color here isn't the perfect name. This is essentially the background color. For this one, we can either use a tuple with a light and a dark color, or we can use a single color that is called transparent. For the colors here, we would either use a hexadecimal color or one of the inbuilt tkinter color names. Which means I can set an FG color and set this to red. If I run this now, we have a red background color. On top of that, I can set a text color. Let's go with white here. With that, we have a white label. Also, I want to put all of this over multiple lines. That's going to make everything a bit easier to read. Another useful thing that customtkinter has that TTK actually doesn't have is corner radius. This one determines the corner radius. I think that's quite obvious. If I set this to a 10, we now have rounded corners for this label. With that, we have a label. Next up, let's create a button. This we create with CTK and then CTK button. What you always have to be aware of, you have C and T in capital letters, and then the K is a lowercase letter. Now, this button, like the label, is first of all going to need a master, which is going to be the window. Then we need some text. I'm going to call this one a CTK button. This button I want to pack. If I run this now, we have a CTK button. We can click on it, but nothing is going to happen. This button now is very easy to customize. For example, if we now set an FG color, for this one, let's use an hexadecimal color. We can use FF and 0. With that, we get yellow. On top of that, we can set the text color. And for this one, just to stick with hexadecimal colors, I want to have a black color, so I'm going to go with 0, 0, and 0. Now we have a yellow button. Although, if I hover over it, we get this dark blue. That we can also change, although, again, I want to do all of this over multiple lines, so it's a bit easier to read. To change the hover color, we need, well, hover color. For this one, I want to have a slightly darker yellow. We started with FF and 0. To get a darker yellow, this should be, let's go with A, and 0. If I run this now, I can hover over it and we get a darker yellow. Other than that, the button works like in TTK, which means we can add a command. This could, for example, be a lambda or literally any function, but in this case, I just want to print a button was pressed. I forgot the semicolon. Now this should be working, and if I click on the button, we get a button was pressed. Now that we can execute a command, we can work on something really cool in customtkinter, and that is to change the theme between light and dark mode. By default, customtkinter uses the default theme of your system. In my case, if I run the entire thing again, if I show you the settings for Windows like this, right now my system setting is dark. If I set this to light, things will need a second to load, but now you can see the app automatically switched to a light mode. If I go back to dark, things need a second again, and there we go. We have a dark style app again, which is really cool for customtkinter because it already knows if the user has a dark or a light mode, and it adjusts for that. Although you can customize this yourself. If you want your app to run in light mode, or in my case, I want the app to run in light mode once I press the button. All you have to do is get CTK set appearance underscore mode. You can either set light or you can set dark. Dark is the one we already have, so I want to have light. Now if I run this and I click on the button, we have light mode. Although if I click on it again, nothing is going to happen. what is even better is that every single color you can specify usually isn't one color, but a tuple of colors. Let's say for the label, if we have a dark mode, I want this to be red, but if we have a light mode, I want this to be blue. Which you simply do in this way. You have a tuple, the first argument is the light color, the second argument is the dark color. Which means if I run this again, right now we have the dark mode, so the color is red for the label, but if I click on CTK button, now the label foreground color is blue, because we have the light mode. This system works with every single color. For example, for the text color, I can have white for the dark mode, and I can have, let's go with black for the light mode. If I now click on the button, now we have black text and a blue background color. Exactly what we specified in here. If you understand all of this so far, you understand the basics of custom tkinter. All you really have to do is look at the documentation and then pick and choose whatever widget you want. On the right side, you have CTK widgets. The one I just used was CTK. Then we have CTK button and CTK label. We also have a CTK frame that works like a TTK frame, although this one has a background color. Besides that, we have a text box. We would have a switch, although there's no image. We would have a scroll bar, also no image. Let me find one with an image. We have a slider. This one also doesn't have an image. Okay, some bad luck, but let's play around with a few more. The system here doesn't really change. If you followed this series so far, you already know how to use all of this. Let's say for the next part, I want to create a frame. This one is going to be CTK and frame. Although I forgot CTK.CTK frame. For this one, as always, we need a master, which is going to be the window. If I pack this frame now, you can see this already has a background color. If you don't like it, you can simply set the FG color to transparent. That way it disappears. This frame is going to work like any other frame we have seen so far, which means you can add elements in here. Let's say I want to add a slider in there. This we create with CTK and CTK slider. The parent now is going to be the frame, and let's pack it right away. Slider.pack. There we go. Now we have a slider in here, and this one works like any other slider. Just to visualize that this is indeed inside of a frame, let's remove the background color. Now we can see that there's a slight background behind the slider. If I'm adding some padding, let's say pad X is 20 and pad Y is also 20. Now all of this is much more visible. What you can also do is combine custom tkinter with standard tkinter. For that though, I have to import tkinter as tk, and I want from tkinter import ttk. It is totally fine to combine ttk widgets with custom tkinter widgets. Although most of the time, the TTK widgets, especially when you put them right next to the custom tkinter widgets, they start to look really bad. So generally, I wouldn't recommend doing it. However, what you might want to do is use the tkinter variables. Those work perfectly fine with the custom tkinter variables. For example, for the label, I can create a, let's call it a string var, which is going to be tk and string var. For the value here, we could set a custom string. This string var we can set as the text variable for the label. So string var, place it in here, and now we get a custom string for the label. Although, strictly speaking, custom tkinter also has inbuilt tkinter variables. We get those by simply using ctk, and then we can use string var, int var, and so on. Which means if I have ctk instead of tk, we're not going to see a difference. Right now, the ctk and the tk variables are identical, although that might change in the future. If you are using tkinter variables and using custom tkinter, use the custom tkinter variables. With that, we have all of the basics of custom tkinter. It really doesn't get that much more complicated, which means we can do an exercise and then we are done. What I want you guys to do is going to look something like this. All the way at the bottom, we now have an exercise switch. This one looks absolutely horrible, but if you can make it look this horrible in custom tkinter, you definitely know how to change a lot of different things. Which means you have to look at the documentation, use the custom tkinter switch, and then make it look something like this. Pause the video now and try to implement this one yourself. We have to create a custom tkinter switch. Although, first of all, let me add an exercise text in here. I want to create a switch, and this we create with custom tkinter and then ctk switch. This one, first of all, needs a master, so window is the default argument here. Next up, I want to have some text. This is going to be the exercise switch. To get started, this is all we need, which means now I want to pack this switch. I have made an error, and you can already see I made a typo. The k here should be lowercase, which means ct lowercase k. Now let's try this, and there we go. Now we have a basic switch that by default is looking pretty good. We want to make this thing look absolutely horrible, so let's talk about how to customize this thing. And to customize anything in custom tkinter, the first step should always be look at the documentation. Here's the documentation. I still have the slider open, but I want to look at ctk switch. This one here. This one has a huge amount of arguments we could be working with. I actually only used a small amount of them. You could make this look even worse. I guess we can start with the colors. I want to have a FG color of red. Don't forget the comma. Now if I run this, we get some bits of red. To get the other color, we need what is called progress color. This, in my case, I want to be pink. Now we have red or we have pink. I guess FG color sometimes here is a bit misleading. It's basically the background color, but you get the idea. Also, if you wanted to, you could add a tuple in here with red for the dark mode and let's say blue for the light mode. If I run this now, we have red as a default, but if I change this to the light mode, now this is blue. So once again, a tuple always works here to get the light mode color. Besides that, if you want to change the color of the actual button, you want the button color. I'm not sure if button is the proper name, but you get the idea. In my case, I changed this one to green. Now we have a green color for the button. Although if I hover over it, it becomes white. That I also want to change. And for that, we have the button hover color. I set this one to yellow. Now if I run this again and I hover over it, it's yellow. You can already see we have a ton of customization here. All of the colors can be changed. And this wouldn't really be doable if we used a theme, because this one relies much more heavily on images, so those couldn't be easily changed. What we can also do, since all of this is dynamically generated, we could set a switch width. If I set this to 10, you should already be able to see what's going on. Now we have the width of the thing being much more narrow. And if I click on it, nothing is going to happen. Although if I change this to, let's say, 60, now you can see we have a much wider switch. You can also set this switch underscore height to, let's say, 30. And now you have a huge switch thingy. If you want to make this thing look really horrible, you can set the corner radius, and this changes the corner radius of the button. If I set this to a 2, now we get a very thin slider. Although it all still works perfectly fine. I just made a mistake. I just realized when we set the corner radius, we are setting the corner radius both of the button and the corner radius of the background. These corners here, this corner as well. So with that, we have custom tkinter, or at the very least, the basics of custom tkinter. If you know TTK already, using custom tkinter is really easy. Basically, all you have to do is replace TTK and then the widget with custom TK and then CTK and then the widget name. For 90% of the time, this is all you have to do.